Okay, so in this first part, we're going to set up the project. The main things about the project that is the normal setup that we will do in any GUI project that we have done before. But I want to give you this as a reminder because many of you were a little bit lost when we were trying to do this in the last class. So first of all, what we did last class was that we decided what application we were going to do. And the best way to decide on what application is to start with the design. So in the design that we created last class, what we said is that we were going to create a personal finance application that will allow users to add the expenses that they make on their personal finances and to see what they have, the expenses that they have made in the past. So how that's work, we're going to have two screens. We're going to have one simple screen that is this one, that is going to have just one button that is going to take us to a second screen to add a new entry or a new expense. And we're going to have a table view that will allow us to see past expenses over here, okay? What we missed to do last class was to make sure that we have IDs for the things that need to have an ID. So for example, for this button, there's some things that we're going to need. For sure, we're going to need to have that button have an on action to do something when we click on it. And that action will be to load the other screen, right? So we need to come up with names for those for these events that we want to trigger, yeah? So I'm going to call this one on click add, yeah, add entry. That's what this button is going to do. We don't necessarily need an ID for that button, but we do need to have an action when we press that button. For the table view, we definitely going to need to have an ID because we're going to modify that table. So we're going to call that table view data, I don't know, or just simply table view because we're only going to have one, so that's simple. Make sure that you always save. Remember that SimBuilder doesn't save for you, so you're gonna have to save by yourself. And as part of a table view, you're gonna have something that is called the table columns that represent each one of the columns that you're gonna have on your table. So the table columns that we're gonna have, and we're actually gonna need to have 4 of those. So I'm gonna make sure to add more of those in a second. So these tables also gonna need to have an ID, these table columns. I'm going to create one that is going to hold the date of the expense. And I'm going to put that as a title here, date. The second one is going to have a table column with the description. Let's call it description of the expense. And we're going to change the title here to description. We are going to make sure to add other ones. I'm going to duplicate this one. And this one is going to be the description, then maybe the value that expense represented. And this one is going to be called table column value. And then we are also, let's duplicate this one, going to have a category. Yep. You can play with the view of this to make it more organized with things like the sizing of these columns. That's going to be on the layout. You're going to decide what will be the width of these ones, the category, maybe something like 100 or 150. You can organize that however you prefer. Definitely the description is going to need a little bit more of space. Let's make it like 250 maybe too much, 200. And well, you can play with that. Okay, so we have the columns. The columns have the IDs, and we have the button with a method assigned to it, which is what we need at the moment. I'm gonna save. I'm gonna look at the other one that we created. We said we can align all of these, of course. You guys can work on aligning and making this look beautiful and more organized. But the important part is that we needed to have a date box. This one, we are going to need to also have an ID for this one. So we're going to call this one, this is going to be a date picker. I'm just going to call it date picker because we only have one. And we also going to need to add, like I said, maybe a description of what this expense is about. So this one where we're gonna put, or our users are gonna type the description, is gonna be called, this is a text field, so I call it TXT description. That way it's easier for me to remember what I put there. We're also gonna have one for the value of the expense, how much I spend. And this one is gonna be a TXT value. And then the last one is gonna be the category. So this one is gonna be a TXT category. I don't care about putting IDs to the labels because I'm not planning to change these labels, right? But I do plan to access and modify these boxes. That's what I need to have the IDs for those ones. Additionally, I created this label to display when the value has been saved. Initially, maybe that label shouldn't have anything on it, should be empty, but I definitely need to have an ID on that one so I can change it. So this one is gonna be a label result, I'm gonna call it, to display results, yeah? We're also gonna have a button to go back that will take me back to the previous window, maybe see expenses should be called, to that window where we see the expenses, see all of the expenses, and we can add more. And both of them are gonna need action. So the add entry, I'm gonna call it entry. And the see expenses, maybe on click, see expenses or something like that. Yeah, this is what is gonna take me back to the previous screen. That's it. So now our FXML are saved and they have all of the IDs and all of the information that we need for them to have. Now, what we're gonna do is that I'm gonna go to IntelliJ and I'm gonna create the project from start. So you guys are not confused. Remember that when you create a new project, what we're gonna do in this case is that we are creating a project that will be not a new project. We're gonna go with the JavaFX project. That's very important that we make sure that we're doing a JavaFX project. You can give it a project name. I'm gonna call this personal finance project. It's gonna be located in my folder for ideas. That's fine. Well, let's call it actually OOP for GUI project. How about that? Okay. Make sure that you use an updated JDK. I'm using the JDK 19. You can download a new one if you don't have 19, or you can use an old one, whatever you prefer. I'm gonna click next. I'm actually not gonna add any of those libraries at this point. If I need them, I will add them later. For now, I'm just gonna create a project like that. By default, it's going to create a sample project for you. So before you do anything else, go ahead and test the code that they give you as a sample, just to make sure that your JDK and that your JavaFX projects are actually working properly. So this is the sample that it creates. It's inside of the source folder. There's an application here that I can run. And without doing anything, this one should run perfectly fine. That means that your JavaFX is working properly and that your IntelliJ is working properly. So here it is. Sample application is working. So that means that I can start the coding part. So what is my coding part here? Just to remind you the structure. Inside of the source folder, at this level on the Java folder, we are going to create a separate package for a project to make sure that we have things organized. I'm going to call that package personal finance, no spaces, capital P. Parallel to that, I'm also going to create a folder under the resources folder. That will be a directory that needs to be called exactly the same. Here is where the programs begin when you forget that these two should have the same name, okay? This one is the one that we created last time, and inside of this is where we actually created those FXML files. If you don't have them there, you can move them there or you can create them again, yeah? So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna move those files over here. I'm actually have them, let me see where they are. So I'm gonna go and move them over here. I know that they are in my idea projects, the ones that I just created. So I'm gonna go and look for them. They were over here. So here I have, these are the two FXMLs that I created. I'm gonna copy them and I'm gonna come over here and paste them. There you go. So here I have my two FXMLs. Perfectly well. And now inside of the package, I'm going to create the structure, the files that I need for my application to work. So here they are. The first thing that I need to create is a JavaFX application file. This is the one that is going to run the show. I'm going to call it the personal finance application. Remember, this is the one that is going to have this start method. That is the one that is going to start the entire execution of my program. We're going to fill that in a second. Before we do that, I want to remind you that you also need to modify the module info file that is already created there. We need to duplicate these two lines to make sure that we include the new project that we're creating. So I'm going to say, I'm going to open the personal finance project to the JavaFX FXML. And I'm going to make sure that when I export, it exports to the personal finance as well. These lines are super important for our project to work, okay? The next thing that I'm going to do is to write my application file. So on my application file, I need to write the start method. What goes into the start method? Remember that the start method is the one that is going to help me load my FXML, my initial FXML. The one that I want loaded first is this one, the main window, right? So I'm going to create an FXML loader object that is going to take care of that. So what this one does is that it's going to go and load that file. How am I going to do that? I need to go to in the constructor, I need to actually load this resource. So I'm going to get the resources, and the specific resource that I want to get is that personal finance view.fxml file that I created before. Okay. So this is what I'm loading. I'm going to close this a little bit so you guys can see the whole thing. And here it is, new FXML loader. I load from the resources, the file that I created, and there you go, okay? With that one, then I am going to make sure that you're gonna run into an error here, but I'm gonna let you run into the error first so you guys can see it. What I need to do next is that I need to create a new scene based on that FXML file. I'm gonna do scene. I'm gonna call it scene. And I'm gonna say it's equal to, here it is. So immediately is asking me, of course, to import the class. So I need to import the class. And when I try to load the scene from that FXML loader, it's going to throw me an error over here, okay? So the error that is throwing me over here is because this might result into an input-output exception because I'm trying to open a file and this file might not open. So when you have that error, you can actually click here to help you fix it yourself. But basically what it's asking you is to make sure that you throw an IO exception if it happens. If that file doesn't open, which should open because this file exists, then that exception should be controlled. Now that I have the scene loaded, this is scene loaded, I'm going to use my primary stage and I'm going to set a title for that one. I'm going to call it personal finance. Oh, another thing that I can do here is maybe make sure that I set up the size of that screen. So I can say that maybe 600 by 400 is the size of the main screen, I believe. If not, we can change it there. And we are also going to set the scene to the scene that I created before. So to this one over here. And finally, I'm going to use the show method to start my application. So these are the lines needed to load that FXML, put a title, set the size, load the scene, and actually start the application. That's my application file, okay? Other things that we're missing. When we create those FXML files, they need to be linked to another file that will control them, that will link the logic to the actual view. That file, it's a controller file. That's a regular Java class that we're going to call the personal finance controller. There you go. We're gonna fill this one out later. But for the moment, we're gonna need to go back to the FXML files because they need to be linked to this controller. And we're actually going to link both FXML files to the same controller. So we're gonna use this one controller for both of them. So when I double click on any of them, you're gonna see that I have an error here at the beginning. Actually, that one is already fixed, but you guys should have an error here because this is pointing to the wrong controller by default. So all you need to do is go back over here to the controller and make sure that you mention that the controller that you're gonna use is this file, okay? There you go. There you go. You need to make sure that you repeat that over here, although this one is fixed. Now, other errors that you're gonna have on the controllers are related to the methods. Remember that we did say that when we press this button on the main page, there was supposed to be a method and this method doesn't exist. So you can go ahead and create it manually, or you can just mouse over here and say, I cannot find this method. Go ahead and create it for me and they will create it on my controller file. And I'm gonna do the same for the other one. It won't find those two methods, should be two, can only find one, I don't know why, that we said we were going to create. So we did say that we had two, this one didn't get saved. So I'm just gonna go back and change that. I'm gonna go and open this on the scene builder and we had two buttons here. Let's see what happened there. So this button is supposed to have and on action add entry, that's correct. And here this one didn't get saved. So let's call it on click. See expenses, maybe we forgot to save. Then I save, I get out of there and save. And now when I come back here, now I have two errors here. So I'm gonna fix both of those. I just need to mouse over and have them create the methods for me. Click, mouse over, remember not to click, just mouse over and click. So now I have three methods on my controller file. I have three methods that I need to write, pending for me to write, okay? Good. So I have my application, my controller, my FXMLs. I have it all in place. At this point, you should stop and you should test because your application, even though it's doing nothing, it should be running and it's running. It's loading the first screen. That is, of course, doing nothing at the moment, but it's loading correctly. So that means that I have set up my application, my controller, my module info, and my two FXML files correctly. Okay? Good. What else do we need to set? Let's talk about the logic. So we said that the idea is that we are going to have this application, right? What is it? This application that is going to list all of my expenses. And every time that I press add entry, it's going to go to this window and allow me to enter a new expense. So that means that I need to create the logic for this. So the object that I see is that each one of my expenses are going to be an individual object. That means that I need to create a class for it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to call that one, that's a Java class, and I'm going to call it a personal finance entry. Yeah, that's an entry, one entry. There you go. So what's going to be one entry on my application? I'm going to have a date. I'm going to have a description. I'm going to have a value for that expense, and I'm going to have a category. Very OOP2 kind of thing. Now we need to just automatically go ahead and create getter setters constructor. I'm gonna go ahead and do that really fast. Perfect. I did then constructor with all of the values, getter for all of my attributes, and my class is complete. I'm gonna need to have a toString. And here's the other part that we're gonna try to do. what we're gonna try to do is that we want to have persistent memory, right? So we're gonna explain that in a minute, but the idea is that every time that I add an entry, it gets listed on this little table, but also when I close the application and open it up again, I should see that list. The way to do that is that I'm going to save that list on a text file. So I'm going to have a text file that each line is going to be each one of my expenses. So my toString that I'm creating right now is going to try to go ahead and link to that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a toString that is going to take care of that. Okay. I'm going to do my toString method. And my toString method is going to convert each one of these personal finance entries into a line of text, okay, in that order. So I'm going to do, this one is going to return the date plus, and each one of those values are going to be separated by commas. That's the easiest way to maybe organize them. So I'm just going to do that. The date, then the description, plus a comma in between, plus the value of that expense, plus a comma in between, plus the category. And that's it. That's going to be my toString. Just a text that is going to have all of those values separated by commas. Done. I'm going to maybe modify this one a little bit further after, but for now, that's a very good beginning. Okay. So there you go. Now I have one entry, but I'm going to need to have many of them. So here comes OOP4. We're going to create another class. And this class is the one that is going to take care of all the entries, right? So I'm just going to call it personal finance list. Okay, there you go. So on this class, I'm going to create, and I'm going to use array list for this, an array list of personal finance entries. I'm going to call it PF list. Okay, my personal finance list. And that's going to be simply equals to a new array list. There you go. For the time being, I'm not going to add, but here is what I will add methods to manipulate all the entries on the list. Yeah, which is what we have been doing on OOP4. This is the OOP4 applied pass, a part that is part of the logic of your program. Yeah. So at the moment I have these 4 classes. I have my controller, I have my application, I have my module info, I have my 2 FXMLs ready to go. I'm ready to go. Okay. I'm going to stop right there. Let me know when you're done with this part.